All right, everyone, it's 5:30. Let's go ahead and get our first fall symposium for human services started. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Paul, and then we'll get right into her presentation and lecture. So let's see. Dr. Paul received her PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Vermont in 1997. Dr. Paul joined the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, which is an APA-accredited clinical psychology doctoral program, as the Associate Director of Clinical Training in 2004, and in 2019 was promoted to Professor in Residence. Dr. Paul's duties are centered on overseeing professional competency development in alignment with accreditation standards. In 2012, she took on the added function of Director of the Practice at UNLV's Interdisciplinary Mental and Behavioral Health Training Clinic. And in 2018, she won the statewide Graduate Academic Advisor Award. As an active member of the Nevada Psychological Association, she has served on committees and as Executive Board President. She was honored by the association for an outstanding advocate for psychology. Later in 2012, she was appointed to the Nevada Board of Psychological Examiners. Since her appointment, she has led the board's Legislative Committee, Application, Tracking, Evaluation, and Mobility Committee, and has served as president since 2016. That's a lot of responsibility. Finally, Dr. Paul has been practicing psychology since 1999. Her clinical interests are general with an emphasis in supervision, clinical and forensic psychology assessment, and child behavioral disorders. Welcome, Dr. Paul. Let's start video.
Okay.
I think you have to sit now. There we are. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. It's very good to see you and spend some time with you all. I apologize in advance. I'm sitting on the floor in my home, leaning against my couch because my very excited dog, who has not seen anybody all day, could not tolerate me being anywhere other than next to her on the floor. So,
what's your dog's name?
Her name is Lady, and
Lady.
she may pop her head up. Let's see.
Okay, we might get a surprise guest then.
She is a rescue, and we just got her about 2 months ago, so she's needing a lot of extra reassurance and attention and love and all of those wonderful things that we like to give our pets. So thank you for indulging me.
Oh yeah, that's the miracle of technology. We can all be somewhere else and be together, and I love that. And
yeah,
I'm in my home office, so it's nice and cozy here too. So,
and maybe a number of you are sitting in comfortable spots as well, listening in on this conversation. So we are all in our virtual living rooms together. Maybe we'll get into this a little bit, but telemental health or telepsychology, telehealth services are certainly gaining traction in the United States and in Nevada. In fact, Nevada is one of the first states to have joined the PsyPact, which is the Telepsychology Compact, where if you are a psychologist licensed in a given state and then you want to practice in another compact state, you can do so through telemental health means, which is really going to help a lot with increasing access to care and kind of mobility of professionals. We're in an increasingly mobile society, and so healthcare professionals across the board are working really hard to figure out how can we maximize mobility for licensed professionals so that there are fewer obstacles to good mental health care. So that's sort of a nice segue into that topic. And if people have more questions about PsyPact or telepsychology, but Nevada, I'm really proud of Nevada for being one of the first states to join the compact, and they needed 7 states to join. And as of now, 12 states have finally joined, and the 7th state was joined in around, I think March or April. So they're just getting it all launched so that people in Nevada will be able to benefit from folks who are in 12 other compact states, and then Nevadans can serve neighboring states like Arizona. So I could provide services to somebody in Kingman, for example, through telepsychology means now, without having to get licensed in all those states.
Right. And some story context to that is that without those kinds of agreements between states, it's actually not legal or ethical to practice across state lines.
Right.
So there's always been kind of a weird, like I have clients who'll go out of state and they're on vacation and they want to maybe do telehealth. And I'm like, well, okay, we can do it because I see you normally at the office.
Right.
And then they might relocate to another state. And then I'm like, well, it's best that we get you somebody else.
Right.
And we've already had this relationship. So this opens a lot of doors to the critical need we have for mental health therapists. And most of the students probably don't know this, but Dr. Paul's the practice at UNLV actually serves as GBC's mental health provider for the college. And we do that through teleservices because we're so spread out, we wouldn't have any other way to get those services met. So it's a really great partnership that's been going on for a long time.
Right. Yep. So I'll sort of pull back, and as people are, I think as people are posing questions, Professor Sita is going to kind of serve as the facilitator, so feel free to interrupt me. But I thought I'd pull back a little bit and say a little bit about the state of Nevada. I saw somebody posted in chat that Nevada is a good state. I totally agree. And Nevada has a long way to go when it comes to mental health care. So Mental Health America puts out an annual report, and you can Google that and look at it online. It's a very interesting report to navigate around and see how we compare to other states. And we, unfortunately, are last in the nation for access to quality mental health care given the need. So it's a kind of a combination of factors that they pool all together. And overall, but Nevada is last in the nation for access to mental health care, and we're including youth. I think the problem is probably even more critical with our youth population. So what does that mean? That means that we have a high need for mental health services, and we don't have enough providers. So our mental health workforce is underdeveloped, and that is across several types of providers. So there are doctoral level providers. There are psychiatrists who are trained as physicians first, and then there are psychologists who are trained at the doctoral level. They can either get a PhD or what's called a PsyD, P-S-Y-D, a doctorate of psychology versus a doctorate of philosophy. And I can talk about those. I'm going to talk about psychology doctoral training in a minute so people have an appreciation for what that means. So a psychologist right now is defined as a doctorally trained mental health professional who is not medically trained. So we do research and get either a PhD or a PsyD. Other mental health providers that are license eligible in the state of Nevada and recognized as professions who provide mental health services are social workers. And you can be, I don't know if everybody heard, that was ladies wagging and shaking her ears. Social workers, there's different levels of social work. They can be licensed clinical social workers, or they can get their master's in social work, and they can work within agencies or work in private practice. We also have licensed professional counselors or licensed clinical professional counselors, LCPCs. Professor Sita is one of those. We have marriage and family therapists. We have licensed alcohol and drug counselors, and if they get an extra, how many hours of supervised experience? Is it an extra 3,000 hours? Then they're called LADCCs, which means they get an extra clinical designation, which means they can provide services to people who have comorbid conditions, meaning they have a substance abuse problem and another mental health disorder.
Yeah, in addition to the training, they have to be, they have to take some additional exams, and they have to be master's level trained.
Got it. And then we also have, working within our school systems, we have school psychologists. Those folks are credentialed at the Master's Plus One. They sort of have a 3-year program, and they become approved through the National Association of School Psychologists. So as long as they work within the school district, they can provide mental and behavioral health services at the master's level. Now, to make things all the more complicated and interesting, turning back to psychology, the field of psychology has decided to pursue master's level credentialing, accreditation for programs, and then master's level licensing across the nation. So there was a time when master's level psychology was more prominent, and many states licensed at the master's level in psychology, but then the American Psychological Association decided that the entry to practice for psychologists would be at the doctoral level. And that is all well and good, but then it leaves out a chunk of folks at the master's level who have similar credentials to people with counseling degrees and similar credentials to people with marriage and family therapy degrees. And so psychology as a profession has sort of thought again about maybe we shouldn't have skipped over that master's level credential, and maybe we need to circle back and revise that. So I think Nevada is going to be ripe for actually accrediting at the master's level psychology programs and creating a path to licensure through psychology without having to jump to a different profession, which a lot of people who they'll get their bachelor's in psychology, and then they love their psychology courses and they love the science of psychology, and they have to switch to a marriage and family therapy or social work or mental health counseling program and move away from what they liked about psychology. Not that those other programs don't offer amazing training and amazing theoretical perspectives. They do, but master's level psychology or bachelor's level psychology people sometimes want to continue pursuing psychology as at the master's level, but they can't, or they can, but only on the way to a PhD. But now it looks like, I would guess in the next 5 to 10 years, master's level psychology will be a thing, and that Nevada will hop on board with that idea because we have such a mental health workforce shortage. So anyway, for those of you kind of thinking about where might you, if you're interested in being a mental health care provider, you have a number of paths to take. And so then the question becomes, so I'm a psychologist, so I'm going to talk from the perspective of psychology. Do you want to be a clinical psychologist or a counseling psychologist? Because that's another way to go. There are doctoral programs in counseling psychology. There are also doctoral programs in school psychology. The most prominent set of doctoral programs are in clinical psychology. So you have to ask yourself, why do I want to become a clinical psychologist, which is what I'm trained to be. So clinical psychology at the doctoral level emphasizes research, basically. It's not enough to want to help people, although that's a good thing. I want people who come into the field to want to help people. But doctoral psychology training requires, if anybody's taken a Psych 101 class, you know that the science of psychology covers a lot of areas of functioning. And little do people realize that psychology is actually a hard science. You have to be able to do statistics. You have to understand how to design a study. You have to understand how to design a research question. You have to be able to write up your results, interpret those mathematical, statistical findings, and be interested in presenting, disseminating, and publishing your research, even if that means even if you're not necessarily going to do that for your career, to get the degree. That is absolutely a skill set that is required, and is a skill set that somebody should really want to, sink their teeth into.
Dr. Paul, one way I describe when I'm going over questions like these for students is I say a psychologist is a scientist clinician, because they are trained to be scientists, and then they are also trained to be clinicians. Where even an MD is more trained for clinical work and not necessarily scientific research and the discipline of scientific study. So within that specific discipline. So there's a lot of people who like psychology and counseling and mental health, and but they're not really suited towards the hard sciences. And this is one reason I wanted you to come to talk to our folks today, because I know there's a number of students who are salivating everything you're saying, thinking, that's me, that's who I want to be, this is what I want to be. I want to be Dr. Paul when I grow up. And there's others that they're going to help direct them towards a field that's similar or has comes from the same body of research or similar, but is not going to be so intense in terms of scientific scholarship.
Yeah, and to make it even more exciting and complicated, the field of, I'll call it this, health service psychology. So whether it's counseling psychology at the doctoral level, school psychology at the doctoral level, and clinical psychology at the doctoral level, those all fit under health service psychology. And within health service psychology, there are 3 training models. And if you think about it like a seesaw, in the middle, you have the scientist practitioner model, where the programs try to balance the science and the research training with the clinical training. And the programs, I think, that do it best they kind of want people to be excellent in both, which is kind of like finding a unicorn sometimes, but that's the ideal. Then on the other sides of the teeter-totter on the seesaw you'll move more towards science down here. So those programs are clinical science programs. So not scientist practitioner, clinical science. They really emphasize the research. They expect their graduates to maybe go into academia. The students spend a lot of time in the research lab. They get clinical training, but the clinical training is always around asking a research question, always about running a research study, or 90% of the time. And they see their successful graduates as people who have gone on to pursue research degrees or research careers. Maybe they work in an agency, but they are working on writing grants and pursuing big major projects that disseminate what are called evidence-based practices. Those are the successful folks in their mind. On the other end, you have practitioner scholar programs. Now, those are the programs that tend to be the PsyD programs, the Doctorate of Psychology programs. And while they care a great deal about the scholarship of the profession, they really emphasize a lot more clinical training. And so more courses are applied. They spend a lot more time out in the field doing supervised clinical work, and they don't have dissertations that require them to maybe gather primary data, or the students aren't expected to design a research study. They might jump onto a project, or I knew somebody who did like a PSA video project as her doctoral project coming out of a PsyD program. So within doctoral level training, there's three different types of programs. So students are also expected to kind of figure out within psychology, where do I want to go? Now, whether you go, no matter which field you choose in your area of study, or like which one you want to pursue in terms of mental health care, one of my biggest pieces of advice is to apply to accredited programs. Now, so there's two types of accreditation. I've got a cat who's also like deciding that he wants to talk right now. He's 19 years old. He's allowed to let me know how he feels.
Whatever he wants.
Yeah. So what was I saying? Okay, accreditation. There are programs out there that are working towards accreditation. And those are probably good programs and it's worth asking about, but you want to find programs that are actually accredited by the body that accredits them. So first of all, you have an institution that's accredited. So UNR, Great Basin, we're accredited as institutions. That's important. I've certainly run into people who have gone to unaccredited institutions. Then within the institution, the program itself has to be accredited. So psychology programs are accredited by the American Psychological Association. The AAMFT is the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. They accredit those programs. KCREP accredits mental health counseling programs. Oscar, you would know. Professor Sita, you'd know.
Yeah, and the National Organization of Human Services Professional, we are accredited. And I'm actually working on the accreditation report right now to be reaccredited, which is why I'm so behind on grading, just so y'all know.
These are big undertakings.
Yes.
Accreditation means that a team of people came to the university and met with the students, met with the professors, really dug into the curriculum and the syllabi, and they looked at every single student and their progress and the extent to which and how successful the students are after they leave the program. They really go through our programs with a fine-tooth comb. Programs that are not accredited don't go through that process. More likely than not, non-accredited programs are freestanding for-profit programs, unless
expensive programs too.
And they are expensive. That's right. They cost $40,000 a year. So think about that too when you're seeking, when you're pursuing your interest, because the median salary for a psychologist at the doctoral level is about $70,000 a year. So do you really want to spend $200,000 to get your degree to make $70,000? That's, that's a kind of an issue in the field right now for psychology. What are we doing in these freestanding programs? The freestanding programs tend to be the PsyD programs, the ones that are practitioner scholar programs. Not all. There are some PsyD practitioner scholar programs that are affiliated with the traditional brick and mortar institutions. Like there's a famous one at Rutgers University that are nonprofit, not-for-profit organizations. So people just, buyer beware when you're going out there. And that's the other part of it is, sometimes people get stars in their eyes. I want to have my doctorate. I want to be called doctor. And they sort of see it as prestigious, but you have to be thoughtful about, well, really, why do you want to become a psychologist? Is it about prestige? It's about being able to call yourself doctor.
There's a lot to that. And a lot of folks will pursue these programs without realizing that if that's their only motivation, this dream kind of loses its luster pretty quickly, because these are difficult programs. They will require a tremendous amount of effort and also financial investment. And also your whole life kind of in some ways revolves around these programs. And so it's really important to think it through clearly and be very thoughtful about why I really want this. Because if you want prestige and admiration, maybe you could, get a really cool YouTube channel, but getting a PhD isn't the right way to do it. Also, you're not going to be, if that's your main motivation, your clinical work is going to reflect that, because this is difficult work. You can be trying at times. It has many requirements to maintain that licensure, including continued training. And I see folks go through and they burn out. And I'll speak from my background as a CPC. I probably graduated with 30 folks in my cohort, and probably 40% of us are in clinical practice. because it just might not be what you really had in mind. So it's so important to really talk to people. What am I going to be doing? What's a day look like? What,
Right.
you know, what kind of loans am I going to have to take out? How much money is this going to cost? Am I up for that? How many years of investment is it going to take me? Could you talk a little bit about, Michelle, about the progression from, let's say, undergraduate to all the way to PhD, and what that looks like, and time frames?
Yep. Somebody popped up, said, so what should your motivation be? I'll tell you. So what your motive, so I'll tell you, I'll give you my story. First of all, you are the best track to go is to get an undergraduate bachelor's degree in psychology, and you get the foundational knowledge there. You get the basic coursework. You learn if you like stats or not. You learn if you like research, because a bachelor's degree in psychology will teach you statistics, research methods, social psychology, affective, behavioral, cognitive, developmental. It won't touch on the clinical work. You might get an elective that gives you a little bit of a flavor for doing therapy and the theories of therapy, but the bulk of your bachelor's program will be around the basic science of what we know about how people work, from the level of sensation and perception through, what and how our brains work, to how we learn and remember, to how emotions work, to developmental processes and so forth. And so I really liked that. I loved stats. My girlfriend told me I was a masochist because I loved statistics. Those numbers made total sense to me. I also got involved in a research lab very early on with an undergraduate faculty member who was running a lab on basically how the left and the right hemispheres of men and women are different. And so I ran subjects in her study, and I learned how to do lit reviews and how to present posters and publications, and I was good at that too, and I really liked that too. And so the motivation to become a psychologist is that you have to love the science. You have to enjoy thinking like a scientist and being able to, think, test hypotheses, and be willing to be wrong, be willing to not know, and to be somebody who really wants to question and to continue and to have a question and want to research that question. Because what you do then when you get into doctoral training, you have to write a letter of intent that explains, here's why I'm passionate about the science, about the discipline. And I've been studying this, or I've been researching this, and I see these people in your faculty who are interested in those same topic areas and their research, and I want to study alongside them, and I want to contribute to the science through my scholarship activities or my primary research. And the extent to which you want to do that. So somebody asked, could I do those 3 again? The clinical science model, they're the hardcore research folks. They really want to have a line of research. It's going to be applied in its nature. Like they might want to study why their suicide rate's not going down. But they're doing it in the lab in pristine conditions to, really get at that question and break down the science. In the middle are the scientist practitioners. I don't want to air the dirty laundry of the psychology world, but I'll share a little bit with you. The scientist practitioners are not thrilled about the clinical scientists, because the scientist practitioners, a lot of them are very research oriented, but their programs tend to be more balanced. They tend to send their students out for clinical training and have clinical training clinics. UNLV is a scientist practitioner program. So is UNR, although I would say that UNR leans a little more clinical science. But they're a balanced program, and the 2 schools and programs get along great. So I don't take anything away from what I'm saying to suggest that there's any conflict or drama between UNLV and UNR. They're both, we have really good connections and strong program partnership with them. And then on the other side are the folks that are more scholar practitioners. And so people who go into those programs tend to love the science, but maybe they're not as interested in pursuing primary research and collecting their own data. And they like a little more flexibility in how they think about being a scholar, right? So they might do a lit review, or they, like I said, they might take a project based on the science and take that science and apply it through a video intervention program and test that program. And the stats won't be as crazy complicated. And
yeah, so it's more like meta-analysis of the research rather than producing your own research.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I would say that's true. Yeah, you're welcome.
There is a question here. I think what they're asking, is the BS in psychology the same as the BAS in human services? We have a Bachelor of Applied Science. And you can answer that, Michelle, since you probably work on those committees that accept students.
Well, I'd have to look at the curriculum side by side. I would imagine there's a lot of overlap, but I would guess that the human service bachelor's degree is probably going to be sort of parallel to the PsyD program, the practitioner scholar program that I was saying, whereas psychology, the traditional psychology undergraduate program is going to be more the scientist practitioner clinical science orientation. That's probably the best parallel I can think of.
Yeah, and to give you just a short example of the two, so I have a BA in psychology from UNLV. And I designed the BAS program in human services. And the two differences I see is that the applied science degree, which is our degree at Great Basin, has a lot of, we're using applied clinical skills. So more of the technical skills that you might get to actually work with folks in the field right away, where the BA focused much more in-depth on each specific theory and the research that accompanies those theories. So one is more to prepare you, I would say, more for that scientific role, and the other is to prepare you for the work as a clinician in the field. So, however, with the BAS, you can apply to PhD programs in psychology, PsyD programs in psychology, social work programs, and then also master's level counseling programs. So it's very broad in those terms. And I think the only requirement, maybe I'm wrong about this, Michelle, for PhD programs is that it has to be a social science discipline. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the program. Yeah, so for example, like our program doesn't say you have to have majored in psychology. But what we do say is you have to have had foundational preparation in affective, behavioral, cognitive, developmental, social, the history and systems of psychology. And so if it's possible that a student could apply from like your Bachelor's of Applied Science and be missing some things, but their GRE scores are awesome, they managed to get themselves in a research lab. I would say most scientist practitioner and clinical science programs want to see that you participated in a research lab. And can articulate through your essays that you have some ideas. You don't have to know exactly what you want to research, but you have some ideas about a research question and a line of questioning that you want to pursue because you were in a lab, because you were able to demonstrate your research chops. While you don't have to have a major, like we had somebody who majored in kinesiology, but he spent 2 years as a volunteer in a lab at UNLV that works with sports performance, and it's run by a psychologist. And so that kinesiology major had to get a couple of years of research in a psychology lab in order to be ready to apply to the doctoral program, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. There's a question here. How do you get into a PhD sorry, I'm missing one question. How long are the PhD programs generally after obtaining your bachelor? This is a good question.
So if you go straight in with the bachelor's degree, straight from bachelor's, you have to most programs require you get a master's along the way, or do a master's equivalent work. So it is generally at the short end 5 years, and typically more like 6 or 7.
After your bachelor's degree.
After your bachelor's degree. Mm-hmm. So, and then most states require that you get an extra year of supervised practice before they will license you as an independent practitioner. So they'll register you as a postdoc. In Nevada, they're called psychological assistants. So they have their PhD, but they have to work under supervision full-time for a year. So the first few years, like 2 to 3 years, are coursework, and you start your clinical training. You could do your master's thesis, and then your 3rd, 4th years, you have to take comprehensive exams, sort of like in medical school where they have step 1, step 2, step 3 exams. Psychology has similar kind of testing along the way, and then you have to. So in that 3rd, 4th year, you work on your dissertation. And then in that 5th year, you go and do a residency. So in medical school, you graduate and then you go to your residency. In psychology, in all of its wisdom, way back when, in the history of the field, said you can't graduate from our programs unless you do your residency first and do a good job at that first. So that residency is a full-time, we call it an internship, but it's a full-time clinical capstone experience, and students travel all over the country and into Canada to do that, just like medical residents. It's a nationally competitive match process, and there are accredited or not accredited internships. Nevada has, when I first moved to Nevada, there was 1 accredited internship or residency up at the VA in Reno with 3 or 4 positions available. Now we have 4 accredited internships, each with about 4 positions, and probably another one online. UNR is trying to get their counseling center to be accredited. So that's also been an obstacle to building our psychology pipeline. There just weren't accredited internships, so people would leave the state, or it was hard to recruit people to come into the state to stay because we didn't have that capstone experience. So that's getting better. So that's the 5th year typically. Now, if it takes 6 or 7 years, that's usually because people take their time on their dissertations and then they get slowed up. How do you know if an internship is accredited? It will tell you. It'll make it loud and clear that it is an accredited internship on all of its like website and brochures and materials. It'll absolutely be very clear that it's accredited. And if you have to go digging to figure it out, it's probably not accredited.
Right. It's very expensive to be accredited. There's a lot of requirements. So institutes are very proud of that accreditation, and they want everyone to know. There's another question. How do you get your PhD or PsyD program into those programs if your undergraduate institute does not offer research practice opportunities? One way to do that is to volunteer at a lab. You can contact a researcher at a university in your area and ask them, are you looking for volunteers in your lab? And you'll do all kinds of things. I did data entry for like a whole summer at UNLV. And of course, but I also learned about, I attended the meetings and the research projects, and I saw how they were putting together proposals and the research questions and the kinds of things they did to vet out this whole process. And it's really intriguing, but it also taught me that I didn't want to be a researcher. And that was a good experience for me because it redirected me towards a counseling program. Michelle, do you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I would say that's true too. I mean, we kind of have this, even at UNLV and probably UNR too, our psychology undergraduate program is so big. A lot of students have trouble finding research opportunities. And so, or they're in their junior year before they realize like, hey, I really like this, or their senior spring, and they're about to graduate. And so they'll come talk to me and I'll say, it's okay. You can, put your applications into research labs, especially the larger labs, and the psychology departments will have faculty pages, and a lot of them have applications to be a research assistant, and you don't have to be enrolled. I have students who graduated and they need that research experience, and they are volunteering for several labs at the same time. So it's definitely possible. You'll have to advocate for yourself. I highly recommend reaching out to mentors. The good news about Nevada too is if you're pretty passionate about this and you want to give this a good shot, the psychology community everybody knows everybody, or so there's only 530 of us in the entire state. We're 47th in the nation per capita for psychologists per capita. So the good news is it's a small community, and if you reach out and request to have a meeting or a coffee with a psychologist, most people will say yes, and they'll have some ideas about who they can connect you with.
Yeah, and always feel free to talk to me. I know psychologists in the community. We travel in similar circles, not the same, but there's a lot of overlap, and you make great friends and colleagues like Dr. Paul, and we always help each other out. We're always looking to each other for resources, for information. And so we have nice networks there, and I always use those networks to help propel my students. So if this is something you're serious about, you contact me. I can help you get set up even if it's through another institution. I can make phone calls, whatever. So that's my job. So
Professor Theta is definitely, you're lucky to have a class with him. I would totally agree. He's very well connected in the mental health community. He's worked a long time. He's an amazing clinician, and a great person to know. So do well in the class. And
be patient with my grading until accreditation's done. So. Let's see. There was another question that I thought was really interesting. Why is Nevada last in terms of mental health?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's such a big question to ask, but maybe you can focus on some key aspects.
Yeah.
I think that's a big question.
It is a big question. I mean, I think that extra credit for patience. Yeah. I think that Nevada has been a state that has been proud to have small government. And so there has not been the kind of resources put towards mental health care as maybe has been put in other places. I also think we're just not as populated, right? So our workforce has been slow to develop, different from, California. California the population of California is the same as Canada,
Right.
Wow. That's something else. I don't even know. There's like 22,000 psychologists in the state of California. So they've been pumping out psychologists. I imagine the numbers are just as high on the other professions too. Nevada is low in social work and MFT and LC and CPC too. We've just been slow to build our training programs and pump out that workforce. And then I think our agencies have been small because we don't do a lot of funding. Our taxes are low, but that means that we don't have a lot of money to go towards mental health agencies, for example. And so they're not hiring, or they can't afford to hire. I know psychiatry, it's very hard to recruit psychiatrists because Nevada the pay for psychiatrists can't compete with what they can get in other more urban areas. So I think that's an issue. I think we have I think people would argue that our reimbursement rates for mental health are low. So I would also say that Nevada is the lowest, but every state has a problem with mental health access to care. And that, I think, is definitely due to we have not prioritized mental health care in the same way that we have, as a culture, have prioritized physical health care. And so for a very long time, until recent history, you couldn't get reimbursed insurance companies wouldn't pay for you to go see a provider for a mental health condition at par with what they would reimburse for a medical condition. So those kinds of the mental health stigma and the reimbursement rates, and then our politics in Nevada have been about small government. And I also think there's a large community that takes care of its own. Somebody says that they actually do help and pay for anything you need. I'm not quite sure what that is.
I think the insurance providers, maybe that's the question.
Yeah, I think it's getting better.
Yeah.
I think it's getting a lot better. I think we just have some catching up to do. There was a period of time when budgets were really cut back very, very low. And it's just taking us a while to catch up. And UNLV's PhD doctoral program it started in 1999. It's only 20 years old, and we only take 6 to 8 students per year. So you can kind of do the math on that. It's going to take us a long time to get up to the number of psychologists we need, assuming everybody were to stay here. And UNR's program is older, but they take 6 or 8 students a year too. That's typically what a PhD program will take. They only take a handful each year.
Yeah, somebody had asked a question about the for-profit institutes and what's the draw. It's more expensive, and that's one of the reasons. So, UNLV's program takes 4 folks a year, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
And
yeah, they'll take anywhere from 4 to 10 a year typically.
Right, and some of those for-profit institutes can afford to maybe they don't have clinical research staff. They just focus on clinical, and they might have a few folks for research. So it's not, they don't have to maintain the kind of faculty and the complex disciplines that are required in a university setting. So they're more streamlined for producing clinicians, but they also charge more.
They charge more because they have to pay for all those faculty salaries, and they take in class sizes of 30 to 40 at a clip.
Yeah, right. And can you speak a little bit, Dr. Paul, about the financial support that you could get as a doc student at UNLV, for example, and might mirror other programs?
So most PhD programs that are scientist practitioner or clinical science will offer funding. So students are invited to join the programs, and they're given 4 to 5 years of funding, and they usually
Adam's home.
Yep, Adam's home.
Hi, Adam.
Oscar. Professor Sita and 72 students from around the state of Nevada. That's home, everybody. He teaches acting. He's much more interesting than I am.
April says hello too.
Yeah, April says hello. Yes, a lot of people do. Yeah, maybe for fun, you can tell them what Adam used to do. So what were we talking about? Oh, funding, right. So usually you get what's called a graduate assistantship, and you are given, it depends on the program, it depends on the state, it depends on, a lot of faculty will have grants too, and they will fund students out of their grants. So the student will be paid for 20 hours of work per week, and anywhere from, okay, Alexa just said hello too. So anywhere from about 18 to 20,000, and sometimes they'll get funded 30,000 or so for 10 months of work, depending on the institution, depending on the grant, depending on how flush they are. But you're working for it. You know, you're either a research assistant, or you're a teaching assistant, or you're doing some kind of work for 20 hours a week. So, which reminds me, most PhD programs, and I would say probably the majority of PsyD programs, are full-time. They expect you to be in school full-time.
Yeah, it's very difficult to work. You just won't, there's not enough hours in the day and time and the commitments you have to make to your clinical work, your research. Sorry, Michelle, I'm sticking over you.
No, that's okay. And those unaccredited programs, I mean, I get it from the perspective of, I think theoretically some of those unaccredited programs, they're using innovative training models. They might have a hybrid approach, meaning that you live in your home state and then you might go do clinical training several times a year in a major metropolitan area, like for 2-week chunks at a time, or you might travel into California for long weekends and be in class, and then you can theoretically still be working at home. Those programs, that's great. I think those are great ideas, and they advertise that they're working to increase access for diverse populations and people who otherwise can't afford to not work, but they're not accredited. And I think people need to understand that you're getting a doctorate, and we take it very seriously. No medical school would say, oh yeah, you can keep your full-time job and go to medical school. No nursing school would say, yeah, you can keep your full-time job and become a nurse or a physician's assistant or a nurse practitioner. And psychology takes the same, we have the same perspective. This is a doctoral degree, and it's a full-time commitment. And I think that's why those unaccredited programs that are trying something innovative are having trouble.
Yeah, so a lot of times they're not, they don't qualify for federal student loans. They also, you might not be able to get licensed in your state. Some might, some might not. That's the difference between an accredited program and not. That they kind of guarantee licensure, and usually nationwide, because they understand those requirements. That's what accreditation programs do. They ensure the quality and the commitment from the faculty and financial contributions from the institute, because they have to maintain certain faculty numbers and certain classroom sizes. There's a lot, you cannot believe what goes, the amount of details that they ask you. They want to see results. They want to see good practice in education and training. And they want to make sure that there's people accountable to that whole process. So it is very stringent, but it also ensures you guys get a really good education and experience and training.
And listen, at the master's level, if you want to be a mental health provider at the master's level, with rare exception, the scope of practice is virtually the same. Psychology has a slightly expanded scope of practice because we study kind of neuropsychology, neurobiology, the biological basis of behavior, and psychological assessment and testing. And that added layer gives us a somewhat expanded scope. But in terms of the types of diagnoses that'll walk in your door as a mental health provider, and your ability to diagnose and provide intervention and treatment is the same. And so these programs need to be high quality, because you are dealing with people's lives, and we don't want anybody to mistake that and misunderstand how serious that is. I think a lot of people, my father included, he's like, Michelle, what do you do? He just doesn't get it. They don't understand the complexities of they don't understand the complexities of the kind of clinical problems that we see coming through our doors. And I think a lot of people think, oh, just get over it, or right. But
here's a couple questions about funding. How do you, what are the requirements to receive a grant? Those kinds of questions are going to be available on the program's website, or the university's application process. And those differ from program to program. So it would be hard for Michelle to answer that question. But of course, there's a combination of different kinds of funding that occur. That could be institute funding, could be loans, it could be FAFSA, it could be Pell Grants based upon your income or situation.
Usually with the PhD programs, scientist practitioner, clinical science programs, or the ones that are affiliated with the brick and mortar schools, you just apply. And if they want you, they'll offer you funding.
Yeah.
It's kind of how it goes. And then there'll be different funding packages that people will sort of put out there, and they generally will have it on there. Like Professor Sita said, they'll have information about the types of funding they offer and how often they offer it, and whether or not they guarantee 3 or 4 or 5 years of funding. Our program guarantees 4 years of funding. But we generally are able to fulfill 6 years of funding. But yeah, you just, apply.
Here's a great clinical question. How do you relate to a story you've never been through? I presume it's from a client.
Well, I don't try to relate to something never been through, right? I don't try to imagine, well, let me put it this way. I don't try to presume that I would know, right? The stance you want to take with someone is that you are really capable of listening to their story and hearing the core needs that they are seeking to have filled, the valid needs. We can all relate to valid needs and valid emotions. And so that's what I'm always driving to find, is opportunities to validate their needs and to help them sort through what happened, as it pertains to the emotions that they experienced and, you know, the humanity of what it is that they, you know, deserve to have happened to them or not have happened to them. So in that respect, everyone's story is unique, and being human and knowing what the core emotional needs are of all of us, which you learn through your clinical work, you can connect. And also, if somebody really feels like you're listening and seeking to understand, even if you don't quite understand, but you say, I want you to I'm going to ask good questions until you help me understand. I mean, that is almost priceless, right? I mean, that's all we're seeking, is to be seen, like really seen, and understood.
When you offer unbiased compassion, non-judgment, and real interest in the person, and curiosity, without kind of judgment,
Mm-hmm.
people open up like a flower in the afternoon sun, and they are able. There's a cat. They're able to more freely express themselves. This is a very common question when you work with folks who've been addicted to whatever, because there's so much shame and guilt surrounding the whole process of addictions. And so they're looking for clinicians that will understand them, that will listen to them, that won't judge them, because they've got plenty of that from their friends, themselves, their families, and they don't know how to get out of it. And of course, that judgment and those kind of negative feelings that surround that keep people from opening up, from growing, from accessing different types of interventions that can help towards growth and change. And so I hear that a lot. When I was fresh out of grad school, my first group, this guy's like, "What? You know, have you ever been addicted to anything?" I'm like, "No." And how can you help me? I'm like, "Well, I've been studying psychology and counseling research for 7 years, so I think I can give you something." But I kind of could feel where he was going, and what it is that the basic human experience involves suffering, and we all understand what it feels like to not be heard, to be marginalized, to be ignored, to feel different. And if you're a good clinician, that's where you have to start. Those basic counseling skills are empathy. And if without that, you really don't have a lot of hope helping anybody.
Yep. So we can all connect to being made to feel little. In some way, shape, or form, we can all connect to that sense, to that time when we were made to feel little. Somebody didn't validate your experience. I'm cold. No, you're not. You know, that's a sample example of somebody just sort of saying, no, you're not. And then you're like, oh, well, maybe I'm not, right? And we learn, somebody says the sense of belonging. Yeah, right. When we create a space for people to make, and we allow and make room for people to be, to feel what they feel without shame. That's how we connect.
We only had a little bit of time with Dr. Paul left, and I want to make sure if you have anything else you'd like to say, we can go over time. I just want to respect the amount of time you're giving to us today. So if there's anything you'd like to add to our discussion today before we run out of time.
I really appreciate the questions that people have been throwing out. I've been sort of checking them out. I love how engaged you all are. And somebody mentioned like there's mental health court in Nevada. Yep, that's an amazing thing. There is a developmental disabilities court in Southern Nevada. I don't know about elsewhere. There are some really cool things happening in Nevada, and there are many opportunities to work at the various levels that we discussed, to be able to pursue your interests and where your strengths are. I highly recommend doing a survey of where your strengths are and pursue your career based on your strengths, and what motivates you and what gets you up in the morning. Somebody said, how about the homeless situation? Like, that is a huge, complex problem. It is multi-determined. It has to do with, and even within the homeless population, I know they're trying to tackle that problem in Southern Nevada right now. There are different types of reasons why people are homeless. There's severe mental illness, but there's also, financial ruin. There's addiction. There's all different types of reasons why people find themselves without a home. So those are complex problems, and there are people working on those complex problems for sure, in all of those areas. So one resource that I wanted to share with you all, if you all were to Google Mitch, M-I-T-C-H, Prinstein, P-R-I-N-S-T-E-I-N. So I'll say it one more time, Mitch, M-I-T-C-H, Prinstein, P-R-I-N-S-T-E-I-N. He's at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. If you Google Mitch Prinstein, unsolicited advice for applying to graduate school or something like that, he has a whole webpage on his faculty page at UNC, but he also has a free manual where he talks about his advice about clinical psychology versus the other areas, and covers all of the things I talked about today. I highly recommend, if folks are interested in sort of weighing the pros and cons of pursuing a degree in this area, look at that. Yep, he found it. That's a great resource, great advice. And the American Psychological Association also has a really pretty robust website that offers advice on, so you want to pursue a degree in psychology or a career in psychology. And I imagine all those other professions I mentioned too have their own websites. And I don't know, I'm a kind of person that has always operated from my gut, in the sense of, even when I applied to colleges, I kind of walked around. I was like, I like it here. I don't like, my mother and father couldn't figure out why I liked it, but I liked it. But I also read the materials. So read the materials of these different organizations, and see which ones really speak to you, because there are slightly different lenses through which they see the world. Somebody is blaring like a boombox out in my yard. I don't know who. That's a first.
Oh, yeah.
It probably is. He took the dog out for a walk and he started a party out there. Social workers, they come from a different perspective, social justice perspective, mental health counseling, similarly, social justice perspective, MFT folks, they come from systems. Anyway, all I'm saying is there's slightly different lenses. We have a lot of overlap in these fields, but there's room for a lot of contribution from a lot of people. And, it starts with you figuring out who you are and what your values are and where you see yourself contributing best.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Paul, for your time. It's such a pleasure and honor for you to have us, for you to be with us in our first symposium of this year. We have another one coming up. And of course, I'm sure there's be lots of questions. I'm going to let Dr. Paul go because we have 1 hour. And she's got her own personal life to get to. And then
Hi, everybody.
We'll stay on for another half hour and spend some more time and have some discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paul.
You're welcome. Good to see you. Bye.
See you too. Okay, you guys are stuck with me now. So I know there were some more questions. Thank you guys for all the thank yous. That's very sweet. She deserves it. When folks come to our symposiums, the guests, these are usually folks that I know through my own professional network, and they do it as a professional courtesy to me and to this college. So we don't offer them honorariums, which is something I'd like to do, but we just don't have the money right now. So you can imagine what it costs to bring somebody in as a special guest, but they do it because we all help each other out in that way. And it's weird to work with great folks. And thank you guys for all the thoughtful questions. I'm sorry if I missed a few. There's a few other questions I'd like to get to. I imagine you all know that I'm a mental health clinician. So some of these things I could answer if Dr. Paul is not available. One question was, what tip or advice would you give working with individuals with intellectual disabilities when communicating may be difficult? Now, early in my career, I worked with children with autism and other spectrum disorders. And I'll tell you that finding a way to develop a real authentic connection with the individual is really important. So don't worry about the treatment plans. Don't worry about where you're trying to get them to go and the kind of behavior you're trying to get them to change. First, start with, don't ask them to do anything they can't do. These folks communicate in different ways sometimes. They misunderstand social cues and verbal language, and they have to develop some of these skills or be trained very specifically. So the first thing I do, and especially when I was working with children, is play. That's a very natural language. It gives us an opportunity for them to know that I'm safe, that I don't have any kind of resentment towards them. A lot of times the parents, they don't resent them outright, but they resent or they are frustrated by this individual's behavior, and that's why they're bringing them to treatment to kind of manage or change that behavior. So a lot of times they feel that. They have deep emotional experiences just like anyone. Just because I can't articulate them the same way or express them the same way doesn't mean they don't experience them. So that first thing is developing that rapport. And that's true for anybody, but so much more important because it's harder to articulate that connection. So it has to build over time, and you have to develop trust with the individual. I hope that answers the question. How would you better understand if physiology, I imagine psychology, help someone that isn't necessarily going into the field help in life or other? I don't understand the question so much. How do you help somebody understand psychology that maybe that's not in the field? Does that sound right? I think, when I'm trying to help people understand how counseling and mental health services help people, the first thing that I say, which is the tagline for community counseling of Southern Nevada for 20 years, and I did my practicum work there in my graduate program, is that talking heals. Talking helps. And a lot of times people don't believe that. Now that stigma has been changing, and we have specific techniques to help people understand and resolve psychological and emotional issues. So we're using that field of research, and we're applying it to help people understand themselves better, and then they come to their own conclusions. So remember that the mind has its own capacity to heal, just like the body does. If I cut my hand, all kinds of things are happening, and it starts to heal. I don't tell my body to heal itself. The mind has its own faculties too. What most medical interventions and mental health interventions do is to support that system of healing. So, and then we let the kind of nature take its own course, because it knows it has that body wisdom to it that is deeper than any kind of knowledge that we have been able to understand, and probably will continue to inspire and awe us. But we can find ways to encourage that system to improve the health of the individual. There's another question. Police officers and firefighters are more likely to die by suicide than in the line of duty. How can we prevent that? Very careful screening, rotating shifts, giving people extended periods of time off, changing the entire culture of these first responders, because it's kind of like this really tough attitude. And I've given training for first responders, police and fire, and the psychological screening can help, which most of them have, but that tells you where a person's at right now. It doesn't tell you where they're going to be down the road. So a lot of training has been coming about to help first responders understand and deal with their job stress, with also maintaining their readiness to be effective in their role as a first responder. I'm using that term generally because there's a lot of different types of folks out there that do that kind of work, and I don't want to lump them all together. Okay, so How do you help somebody that refuses help? That really depends upon how dire it is. At some point, there's a legal mechanism called a Legal 2000. And if somebody is in danger to themselves or others, that means they're going to kill themselves, or they don't have the capacity to take care of their basic needs like eating, staying out of harm's way, like they could be in a mental state that they're not able to care for themselves, or there's intent to harm someone else, then they can be placed on a legal hold and sent to a hospital or a behavioral health facility. I don't know if that helps. I think more regularly what you'll see is people who don't want to get help that recognize they have an issue, and if you're part of that person's life, it starts to affect you pretty severely, and so you want to minimize your involvement in terms of enabling that behavior. That's a big question. There's a lot of big questions here tonight, and I'm glad to answer as many as I can. We're sure we'll run out of time, but we'll do the best we can. Let's see. What is the path that GBC is directed towards substance abuse counseling? What is the path that GBC is directed towards, comma, substance abuse counseling, maybe question mark? Okay. Sorry. It's when you read it, it's hard to understand. So the bachelor's degree is definitely geared towards substance abuse counseling, but it prepares you for graduate programs in social work, mental health counseling, substance abuse counseling at the graduate level. And then also, I think it opens pathways and doorways to psychology doctoral programs as well. I don't think Michelle wanted to say that outright, but most of the programs will take you into a doctoral program. You have to be kind of a stellar student, because like in their program, UNLV, they take 4 to 10 students a year. Think about that. They're going to take the cream of the crop. So they're going to take the folks that did the extra work to do research. They're going to take the folks who maybe already have had undergraduate research experience. They've attended conferences. They presented at conferences. You're going to have to stand out significantly. There's ways to do that, even at Great Basin, but you have to be informed. You have to do the extra work that's going to be required, because these are coveted positions. And as she said, they provide funding for 5 to 6 years through these programs. So, it's not going to be just, I had good grades and I did okay, and I want to be a PhD. You're going to have to really stand out from normal candidates. Let's see, there's a lot of questions coming, so I'm trying to, yeah, somebody's asking about the passcode. I'll give it to you at the end of the meeting when we've got another 15 minutes or so. And I'll give everyone the passcode, and then you'll put that passcode in, and then that'll complete your assignment for the course. What do you need to do after BAS to help those with dual diagnosis? Well, I'll give you an example. I have a master's degree in clinical mental health, and I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor. I'm also dual licensed as an LCADC, which is licensed clinical alcohol and drug counselor. I know there's a lot of acronyms to remember, but focus on this, that you need a master's degree in a mental health field such as clinical mental health, marriage and family therapy, or social work. Then you can apply for to the Licensed Drug and Alcohol Board for licensure as an intern, and then under supervision after a few years and some other requirements, you can have that status. I'm dually licensed, which means I'm a LCPC, which is a licensed clinical professional counselor, and I'm also a licensed clinical alcohol and drug counselor and a supervisor in both those disciplines. So, but it takes a lot of time and effort to get those things. It's not easy, but you kind of need, when you're dealing with both of these things, a dual diagnosis means you've got a major mental health disorder, such as, let's say, bipolar, and you're also suffer from a substance abuse problem. And so to be able to treat both of those things, you need some extra training. Let's see. That's their choice. I don't know. Oh yeah, I think they're responding to whether they want to have treatment or not. I think that is true. People have the right to choose, but I also think that people are very scared to go into treatment, because that's kind of like admitting you're crazy. Like if you go, there was the old adage, you don't have a drinking problem until you admit you have one. People are afraid of getting that label, but diagnoses are like medical diagnosis in mental health. They come and they go. they're not lifelong. I mean, in the exception of certain conditions, they are, but others are not. And that means that you meet criteria for a mental health diagnosis, and through treatment, and recovery, you can not be diagnosed as that anymore. And that applies to addictions too. Now, I'm not talking about the 12-step model or AA, things like that, where folks maintain that kind of vigilance over and awareness over their recovery process, so they don't kind of relapse, so to say. But in terms of mental health diagnosis, those things change over time. Just like you might have diabetes, and through treatment, through diet and exercise, you might not have that diagnosis any longer. How do you manage a large client caseload and have time to write up your clinical notes? Who's asking this? Is this Amelia? Amelia, yeah. You don't. I don't. That's the easy answer. You know, you get better at it over time, I'll say. But one of the things you have to do is advocate for yourself within agencies and say, I've got too much work to do and I can't get it all done, and I'm going to burn out, and ask for help. A lot of times we're thrown work and they keep piling on us if we keep getting it done. And one thing we have to do is set limits and healthy boundaries on the amount of work that's possible. It's a tremendous amount of work to be in the clinical field, because you have to exercise laser focus on your client for the time that they're with them. And then you're using really high level mental functions to develop diagnoses, to come up with treatment plans, and then to meet all the needs that they might require in order to continue seeing them, such as providing a diagnosis and a treatment plan to insurance companies to ensure they get the care that they need. So there's a lot of moving parts going on, and it can be overwhelming. And I'd always used to set time aside in my clinical day to do those notes. I would get there early, and I tell my boss, like, I get here really early to do all this stuff, so I'm leaving early. And I found that people were, if you're committed and you do a good job, they were flexible with you, and they listen to your needs, because they're going to lose a good clinician if they don't. Go somewhere else where that's kind of taken care of. Okay, I'm just as my talking, I'm losing all kinds of questions here. I hope I answered your question good enough, Amelia. What would you say is the hardest part of being a counselor, and in what ways can you overcome those hardships? I mean, paperwork is the suckiest part of the job, but it's a great profession. If you maintain a healthy mental and physical life, and balance work life and personal life, it doesn't get you down. It actually enhances your life, because I think a lot of folks misunderstand that you're dealing with really sometimes very sick people, but when you watch them change and you develop a deep connection with these folks in terms of the clinical relationship, it's not a relationship outside the clinical office, but there's some kinds of human truths that come through, and there's beauty, and there's transformation, and there's growth, and there's change, and there's lots of tears, and there's all these realizations. But if you don't own their outcome, then it doesn't hurt you at the end of the day. It's like watching a movie. Like I remember this show, Three's Company, when I was a kid. Everything goes wrong in the show. It was a comedy show. It was a terrible show. But and I used to get anxious as a little boy watching this, like, oh my God, everybody's going to get in trouble. But I was, I didn't want these things to happen. As a clinician, I'm patient. I watch my clients. I don't expect anything from them. They don't need to change for me. This is one reason why the clinician can work with the client, because trying to talk to somebody in their personal life that directly affects their lives based on their behavior and their reactions to life has a profound impact on that relationship and the life of the other person. The clinician, they leave my office and it doesn't affect me. And I'll tell me, do you want to get better or not? Here's the things we can do. You don't get better, that's okay too. I'm only here to give you what you need and what you want. If you're not interested in that kind of change, I'm okay with that, because it doesn't affect my life at the end of the day. But you really have to have an open mind to these kinds of things and recognize where your blind spots are. This is why any kind of mental health provider, whether it's a drug and alcohol, a CPC, an MFT, a psychologist, they are supervised for years, because we're looking, and I'm a clinical supervisor, so I'm looking to see where are the blind spots this clinician has, and what are some of the problems they're having in their clinical work. and how is it affecting it? And I'll say, look, there's some unresolved issues here that seem to be coming up for you because you are pissed off with this client, and this client didn't do anything to you. They're just telling you a story, but somehow it resonates with your own experience, and you need to get that in order. And so things like that come up. And so used to be when you became an analyst, like back in the psychoanalytic days, you'd have to go into analysis yourself. We don't have time for that. I mean, you heard what Dr. Paul said. You're 4 years undergrad, there's 6 or 7 years, and then another year on top of that. So you're up to 8 years with school. And imagine having to go in analysis for 2 years. And, okay, I'm trying to answer everyone's questions. Let me take a quick break because I feel like I'm just talking a million miles an hour. I want to remind everybody that we have a open advising for our program on October 30th. It's the day before Halloween, not on Halloween. So that is at 5:30, and I'll be sending out a Zoom link for that. And open advising is just advising, and I'll be there, and you can ask me questions about the program, about what are the next steps, or any kind of question you have about your coursework or planning your degree program. So it's on October 30th. I'll send some links out this week, and we'll get everybody can show up, and we can all have a discussions the same way in this webinar format. I think social work is going to be there too, or they may or may not be there. The other thing that I want to mention is, before everyone goes, do we have to be there at 5? No, it's 5. It starts at 5:30, and it goes to 6:30. So a lot of you are going to have similar questions, and I'll go through a few things. The other thing that I wanted to answer, somebody asked, what can you do with the Human Services program? Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because you can do a lot. And one of the things you can do is that you can pursue graduate programs. And I've designed our program to fit the need of graduate programs within similar disciplines, and all the ones that we mentioned: MFT, CPC, that's what I am, LADC, which is drug and alcohol, and social work. So those master's level conditions, we are good to go. We have enough science, we have the right math, we've got statistics, we've got the major mental disorders, we have interventions training. You guys are in a really good position in that undergraduate program, even in the associate's program. But if you decide to go on to a master's degree, you have to have a bachelor's first. And if that's the route you decide to go, I designed that program to make you guys very strong candidates for those programs. I worked at UNLV for a number of years. I worked for Nevada State College. I've been on contract with UNR. I've worked with every major higher education institute in the state for the most part. And when I was asked to come on board, and they asked me to design a bachelor's program, it was like a dream come true for me. I'm like, really? Because the programs that I had seen were lacking in lots of different ways. And so my mission was to fix all those wrongs. Because even in my psych undergraduate program, I was losing a lot. Thank you guys for that question. Before I get too far away, I'm going to share my screen. Here it is. And this is employment opportunities for the human services field. Now these will vary from agency to agency to based upon if you need an associate's or a bachelor's or even a master's in that field. But these are the things you can do for the most part as a associate's level. This would change, of course, at bachelor's or master's levels. And there are master's level programs in human services. We don't have the one at GBC because we don't have master's programs in general. So this is actually the brochure for your human services program, which is available on our website. So if you have more questions about that, please feel free to call me. You guys are always welcome to call me. A number of you have, and I think I try to answer the phone as soon as it rings and get back to you as soon as I can in terms of emails and messaging. It gets more and more hectic as the semester goes on. So you'll recognize that, I'm sure, so we can download this greatest. Yeah, you can download that brochure if that was you're asking. Okay, we're almost out of time. So I'm gonna give you all the password, but don't everybody a runaway. The password is green apples. And what you're going to do is you're going to take that password, you're going to put it into your assignment, and you're going to submit it. And that's going to show that you attended our conference today. And that's it. You don't have to write a paper. Nobody who attended today has to write a paper. I got some questions and confusion about that. I'm sorry, it's kind of confusing. I wish we could have met in person. It's very difficult to schedule an in-person meeting for a class that doesn't meet all the time. The password, again, is green apples. Like, you know, like apples you put in a pie or something like that, green apples. So just put that into your assignment, hit the submit button, and when I go to grade it, I'll see the password and I'll give you the points. That's it. I do these symposiums because it's a great way for us to interact. I know you guys don't get to see me on a daily basis, or we have live lectures, and I miss that. But at the same time, if we didn't offer all online programming, we wouldn't have as many students as we have participate. I want to give everybody the opportunity for higher education wherever they live. And this is April says it's making her hungry. I'm getting there. This is a great way for us to meet the needs of Nevadans. Somebody asked why there aren't enough clinicians. There's not enough people pursuing this field because a lot of the money goes to business fields or STEM research, and nobody's thinking about human services. Nobody's thinking about our basic humanity and how that affects us. We study things that people in business, in industry, and technology don't study. We study the human condition. We study why people hurt, how to help people feel better, how to help them grow, change, and have lives that are worth living. If all you do is study these hard sciences, you don't really know why you're alive. You don't know what it means to be. And the human services fields, we tap into that. We tap into love. We tap into compassion. And those things are the reason human beings do anything. We always do anything for other people and the relationships that we have. That's it. If you don't have that, you don't have a reason to be. Then you're just kind of like on your own. And thank you guys for all the comments. I probably don't get enough time to thank you guys. And it is, thanks, Tiffany. Thank you guys for all your comments. It really means a lot to me. This program is, I can't tell you, it's my life, my greatest achievement. This is at the top of my career right now. I know whenever you folks, I owe grades for assignments. Please be patient with me. I'm getting to those. As I said, we're under an accreditation review, and that has to be done within the next couple of weeks. So I've been laser focused on that. But I'm always here and available. If you guys have a problem or a crisis, you call me, you email me, you text me, I will get back to you and we'll resolve it. You're never alone. I'm always available. I'm not always available in person, but that's why we have technology to meet that, to bridge that gap. So I want to say one last thing, and then I'm trying to get somebody from the Blind Center to be our special guest for the next symposium. So it's something to look forward to. Is that this field, and I worked in the IT field for 17 years. I was making six figures, well over. I was making a lot of money, but I didn't have that sense of peace and purpose in my life. I felt like I was just doing things to do them. And so, of course, I bought big house and toys and things like that, but I was like, this is it. So I went back to school. I finished my undergrad psych, then I got a master's in mental health counseling, and I've never looked back. And then all of a sudden I'm teaching here one day. I never thought this would happen. It's been a great experience. And the greatest thing that I didn't expect is all the wonderful people you get to work with. Now, from the students, your guys' work is phenomenal. I can't tell you enough how impressed I am. The part-time instructors tell me the same thing. Those folks taught for me at UNLV. I poached them from there and brought them over. So we've got some really great part-time instructors. And they say, you know, the output that the students at GBC do is above what we saw at UNLV. And of course, the entry requirements are much more stringent. And I said, I know, because these people are passionate about this field. And I see that every day in your work. And if I don't always reflect it, I do feel it and I see that. And I'm very proud of this program. I'm very proud. When I go anywhere, if I'm meeting colleagues and I'm going to this Nevada Children's Luncheon Foundation meeting, I have business cards and I'm at GBC and I tell everybody about our program and how well we're doing. And I've got numbers memorized, how many people we're graduating, what our statistics are. And when I talked to President Helens, she came down to the Pahrump campus and made a couple of visits. I made an impression on her. I told her about all the things we were doing, how we launched our bachelor's program in substance abuse counseling. She's an advocate. When she goes to the state legislature, she talks about that. She brags about our program because we are the only bachelor's level program that has that kind of addictions training in it. I saw that it was a big need missing in Nevada, so I plugged that hole with that, and you guys all answered the call because we've got 21 students enrolled in the Human Services Bachelor's program. We've got great numbers. I can't thank you guys enough for your hard work. We're almost out of time, so I like to start on time and end on time to honor your guys' time, and thank you for everyone for being here tonight. It's been a great experience. It was really a lot of fun, and I'm sure Michelle had a blast. We've been good friends for a long time and colleagues, and it was great to have her. So thank you all so much, and don't forget the password is green apples. I look forward to seeing you guys online, and don't forget the open advising is October 30th, 5:30. I'll send a link out, and then we've got the next symposium coming up, and you'll be getting a link for that too. Thank you all. Have a great night.